Hello everyone, and welcome to the Milan Sharma Show, a show discussing a variety of subjects through the lens of civil discourse. I'm your host, Milan Sharma, and today I'll be discussing a topic that is extremely important for relationships, long-term relationships, and romantic relationships, and that is marriage. Now, I've always was curious about this idea of marriage, and being someone that studied psychology in college and communication, the subject really fascinated me, and I've always had a few questions about it. And one of the questions I have that I think is a really profound question is, how has relationships declined so quickly? And I think everyone would agree with this, even if you don't look at the data or studies or whatever. Why has romantic relationships declined so fast, so quickly in the 21st century compared to previous decades? We have so much technology, we have so many things to offer in the world. We can communicate with anybody via FaceTime, via Skype, WhatsApp, Telegram, social media, etc. There are so many avenues of ways to communicate. So why is this idea of relationships declining so quickly? And hence, why are marriages so, the divorce is so high, and it's very hard to maintain them in today's day and age? Why is that the case? When something that was supposed to be a covenant promise to one another is now in deep trouble. There's a really big issue with it. Why is that happening? When we have so many different types of psychologists, so many professionals, therapists, so many, just a lot of different voices nowadays. And people have the ability to do many different things in the workforce nowadays. But why is that so much in decline compared to previous generations? So, as somebody that's always curious about just very much these topics in life, I've always thought about this, and I found an article from the Wall Street Journal. I'll link below, and you can follow along if you'd like. But I really want to talk about this because this article highlighted something that is very key with the idea of marriage in decline, and I think has a lot of interesting answers. Now, obviously, there's no one answer for topics like this. That can be very subjective, very situational, compared to math or science. But I think this can point to a lot of different solutions too. So that's the reason I'm doing this video. I'm not doing this video to propagate my point of view, even though I'll admit this study and this topic kind of affirms my own personal beliefs. But I do believe that learning what this article has to say will benefit everyone in general. And I think not enough people talk about this. So the title of the article, so let's go into it right now. The title of the article is "Too Risky to Wed in Your 20s, Not If You Avoid Cohabiting First." So obviously, in this day and age, many people, the vast majority of people, wait until their upper 20s to early 30s to get married. I mean, the average age for men to get married is about 30, and for women it's about 29. So it's pretty equal in that aspect. And people say that this is the case because people want to be more mature to make a life-altering decision. I mean, this decision, I would argue, is probably the most important decision of your life as far as who you spend your whole life with. As far as like assets is concerned, your whole life is going to change when marriage is initiated. Where you live, how much you work, you're organizing your finances, all these things are a byproduct and have a direct link to who you're married to, because you have to spend money a certain way, budget. All these things are so important. And in a way, the idea of waiting later makes sense to have more maturity. But what we've seen is the opposite. With people waiting so much longer to get married, a lot of times, well, I'm not going to say there's a direct link to waiting later to get married to like failing marriages. I'm not going to say that. But with the vast majority of people waiting till their upper 20s, early 30s to get married, the divorce rate is higher than it was in the 20th century. There's no denying that. That's the fact. So this article is talking about how cohabitating is actually a negative thing to do if you plan to marry them. Now, cohabitating in and of itself, even though I'm not personally a fan of it, cohabitating itself is not the issue in this article. To be clear, this article is talking about first cohabitating and then entering a marriage, and that's where it can be very risky. That's where it can be a lot of problems can come into effect. So let's take a look here. Okay. So one study. So here's a study right here. So here's one statement. Previous breakups from cohabitating may give spouses experience with heading for the exit when the going gets tough. So a survey from the United States government's National Survey of Family Growth, the NFSG, found that in analyzing marriage and divorce from more than 50,000 women, they found that there's a group of women for whom marriage before 30 is not risky. Women who marry directly without ever cohabitating prior to marriage. So again, when you're before 30 and you don't cohabitate, you're less at risk for divorce. In fact, women who married between 22 and 30 without first living together had some of the lowest divorce rates in the survey. Now, to be clear, there's always exceptions to the rule, so I'm not going to deny that. You may think to yourself, I know a neighbor, a friend, a coworker, a family member that has got married at 32, 35, maybe they live together and they have a successful marriage for the last 5 to 10 years. Again, there's always exceptions to the rule. I'm not denying that. But overall, when you look at the whole peripheral vision of the survey, there is no denying the fact that the vast majority of cases, when you're not cohabitating, you have a higher success rate of marriage. But then, let's see. By contrast, for approximately 70% of women in our sample who did cohabitate with one or more partners, there was actually, for them, waiting around 30 was linked to a lower risk of divorce. So it's interesting. Like, people that actually cohabitated for a while, right here, approximately 70% of the sample, there was a lower risk for them to get divorced if they waited until around 30. So they had to wait longer to get married rather than the other way around. But this study, that's only a small sample size there, but they'll point to multiple studies that show cohabitation being a negative aspect here. So one point with why people say like waiting until you're older is better. Now, one point that I love that person makes in this article is that when you're waiting, you're more likely to accumulate relationship baggage, including a list of exes from cohabitating unions that can weigh down their marriage once they tie the knot. The women who marry directly in their 20s are more likely to avoid picking up the baggage on their way to the altar, as are from the men. I think this is a really key point that people don't talk about enough. People talk about, I want to experience different people. I want to date a lot of different people to know what I want. And I understand the idea of that. But even for me, I've always thought to myself that if you're exposing yourself to a lot of different types of women, or a woman exposing themselves to a lot of different types of men, as far as like heterosexual relationships, if you're constantly in a cycle of being together for a few months, breaking up, meeting somebody else, breaking up, short-term relationships ongoing continuously, I personally believe that in itself is unhealthy, because why would you maintain a long-term relationship at all? How would you have the skills to maintain a long-term relationship if you're constantly in short-term springs all the time? If that's your consistent method of continuous short-term relationships. So it's just something to think about. And it's interesting because even the article states right here that the idea that I'll read right from the article right now. The idea that cohabitation is risky is surprising, given that the majority of young adults believe that living together is a good way to pre-test the quality of your partner and your partnership, thereby increasing the quality and stability of the marriage. But a growing body of research indicates that Americans who live together before marriage are less likely to be happily married and more likely to land in divorce court. And in looking at the marital history of thousands of women across the United States, we found that women who cohabitated were 15% more likely to get divorced. And so, anyway, before I continue, I wanted to address that statement right there, that the majority of young adults participate in cohabitation, despite the risk of a heightened divorce rate. And to me, this is where young people are, at least my generation, there's a big contradiction between always following the science and data and what you want to do, being independent, that so-called term. I've noticed that as we've gotten older, I'll make it this point before I make this. As we've gotten older, we've gotten away from religious principles. And it's true, like our society, our culture, we've gotten away from religious principles in general. No matter what religion you are, I believe that many people, whether you're secular, atheist, religious, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, anything like that, I think you would agree that as a society, at least in the Western world, we've gotten away from religious principles. It's in institutions, in our values, we've gotten away from it. There's no denying that. And we've followed this idea of following data and science for everything. And I believe that could be a negative thing at times. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I'm being hypocritical in saying that and citing a study right here. But when, in the past, when people didn't cohabitate and people just got married in their young to mid-20s, there were many more successful marriages at that time. And now there's a reverse trend happening where we have so much in life as far as like being able to communicate with different relationships all over the world, having business conferences and Zoom conferences, all these things, being able to connect entrepreneurs from different continents, different parts of the globe. But now we're seeing declining marriage rates. Marriage and nuclear families are one of the biggest bedrocks. It is a huge bedrock for a successful society to thrive. And seeing that in decline is a huge concern. And that's why I'm doing this video right now, because the idea that cohabitation is linked to increased divorce rates is bad for everybody. It's bad. And it's not like I want to impose my beliefs on anybody else, on you. If you want to do this, you're free to do it. We live in a free society, and you have free will to do as you choose, as long as you're not interfering with other people. But when I see this trend, when I see these divorce rates happening, when I see that there's studies that show that there's increased and highly likely chance of divorce happening, I feel like I need to speak up and say something about this. And if one person hears this video and takes it to heart to change their life, to increase their chances of a successful relationship, I believe that I'll be content with that. And again, you can do whatever you want. I'm simply just the messenger in sharing this with you, because I think it's key that people share this message. Okay, let's continue. This is really fascinating. So, from a Stanford study that I stated earlier about the 15% more likely to get divorced, it indicated that the risk is especially high for women who cohabitated with someone besides their future husband. They were more than twice as likely to end up in divorce court. So again, if you cohabitate with someone else besides your husband and then you get married to someone else, you're experience different types of people, and people are complex. And I believe if you're experiencing different types of people, what's going to happen is you're going to like a few qualities in person X and like a few qualities in person Y. But if you marry person Z is likely not going to flatter you with everything, with all the benchmarks. Person X may be a funnier person than person Z. And you're always going to remember, wait, person X actually had better qualities that I liked more. And I believe that isn't healthy to have that over your head, to compare people that you've dated previously, because that is inevitable when you, first of all, date a lot of different people, but also if you cohabitate with somebody else especially. So that's something I really want to state for everybody here that's listening. And for those listening, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Like, comment, share, comment anything that you like in this video, anything that you dislike. I don't care. Just comment. It's great for the algorithm. It helps me out. And feel free to listen to this and stream this on in your vehicle or in your house or over the speaker with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those different platforms. It is available. Search The Milan Sharma Show and you'll find it.